There's a small facility in the Swiss Alps where something quietly extraordinary happens every day. Human ashes, what remains after cremation, the fine gray powder we typically scatter or store in urns, are heated to temperatures exceeding 1400 degrees Celsius and fused into glass. Not just any glass. Colored, translucent beads that catch the light. Beads you can wear around your neck, carry in your pocket, or place on your windowsill where the morning sun can pass through them. The dead, transformed into something beautiful, something you can touch. Before we start, a quick roll call. Write in the comments which part of this planet you're watching from, and then just listen and enjoy. Most of us grow up with a clear mental image of what happens after death. Burial in the earth, or cremation followed by scattering. A headstone with a name, a place to visit. But what if there was another way? What if the material remains of someone you loved could become something you could hold, something that transforms grief into color, weight into light? This is not science fiction. This is happening now in Switzerland, where a company called Algordanza, the name means remembrance in the Romansh language of the Swiss Alps, has been turning cremation ashes into memorial glass since the early 2000s. They are not alone. Similar services have emerged across Europe, in the United States, in Japan. The practice is growing quietly, spreading through word of mouth, through families who want something different, something personal, something they can keep close. But this raises immediate questions. Is this respectful? Is it sacred? Or is it strange? And what does it mean about our changing relationship with death, with bodies, with memory itself? By the end of this video, we will have explored not just how this process works, the science, the chemistry, the heat and pressure that transforms ash into glass, but also why it works emotionally, why humans across history have needed physical objects to anchor their grief, why some cultures embrace this innovation while others recoil, and what it reveals about the future of death in an age where tradition no longer holds the absolute authority it once did. Because this is not really a story about glass beads. It is a story about transformation, about the stubborn human need to hold on to something when everything else has dissolved into absence, about the materials we choose to carry our dead, and what those choices say about who we are, what we believe, and how we survive loss. Let's begin in Switzerland, in a small town you've probably never heard of, where ash becomes art. The Swiss have always had a particular relationship with precision. Watches, chocolate, banking, clean trains that arrive exactly on time. But precision in death? That's newer. Switzerland has one of the highest cremation rates in the world. Over 90% of deaths result in cremation rather than burial. The reasons are practical: limited land, high costs of traditional burial plots, a cultural shift toward minimalism and environmental consciousness. But high cremation rates created a question. What do you do with all that ash? The traditional answers were limited. You could keep the ashes in an urn on a shelf. You could scatter them somewhere meaningful, a mountainside, a lake, a garden. You could enter them in a columbarium, those walls of small niches you find in cemeteries. But all of these options share something in common: distance. The ashes are over there, separate, untouchable, often because ash is fragile, messy, easily disturbed by wind or accident. Algordanza saw a different possibility. What if ash could be integrated into daily life? What if it could become durable, beautiful, something you didn't have to leave behind when you moved, when you traveled? when you needed comfort at 3 in the morning. The process they developed is both ancient and modern. Glass-making itself goes back thousands of years. The Phoenicians, the Romans, the Venetians all mastered the art of heating sand and minerals until they fused into transparent solidity. But applying this to human remains required innovation. Cremation ash is primarily calcium phosphate, with traces of other minerals depending on the person's diet, bone density, even the medications they took in life. It's not pure, it's complex, and that complexity is what creates the color. Here's what happens. After cremation, a portion of the ash, usually around 100 to 200 grams, though the exact amount varies by family preference, is sent to the facility. The ash is analyzed, then combined with glass-forming materials, silica, soda, sometimes other minerals to ensure proper fusion. This mixture is placed in a crucible and heated to approximately 1400 degrees Celsius. At that temperature, everything melts, becomes liquid, loses its original form completely. Then comes the transformation. The molten material is carefully shaped, sometimes into beads, sometimes into pendants, sometimes into small sculptures or display pieces. As it cools, the minerals in the original ash interact with the glass matrix to create color. Not painted on, not added artificially. The color emerges from within, from the unique chemical signature of that particular person's remains. Blues and greens are common, sometimes amber, sometimes violet, sometimes a smoky gray, shot through with unexpected brightness. No two pieces are identical. The color, the pattern of light and shadow within the glass, the way it catches illumination, all of this is as unique as a fingerprint. Because it is, in a literal sense, made from a person who never existed before and will never exist again. Families receive their memorial glass within weeks. Some choose a single large piece. Others request multiple beads so that siblings, children, grandchildren can each carry a portion. The glass is durable, far more so than ash in an urn. It won't scatter in wind, won't spill, won't degrade over decades or centuries. In theory, memorial glass could last as long as ancient Roman glass has lasted, thousands of years, outliving everyone who knew the person it came from. This durability matters because memory is fragile. People forget, generations pass, stories fade, but objects persist. They carry weight, literally and metaphorically. They can be handed down. They can anchor family histories that might otherwise dissolve into vague recollection. And yet, for all its practicality, memorial glass provokes strong reactions. Some people find it deeply comforting, a perfect solution to the problem of wanting to keep someone close without keeping literal ash in the house. Others find it disturbing, a step too far into commercializing or trivializing the sacred. Some religious traditions explicitly forbid it. Others have no clear position, leaving families to decide for themselves. This tension between innovation and tradition, between personal meaning and collective ritual, between what feels right and what feels strange, this is the terrain we're walking through. And Switzerland, with its memorial glass, is just the beginning. Because humans have always been creative with death. We have always found ways to transform absence into presence, to make the invisible visible, to carry our dead with us even as we continue living. So let's step back. Let's look at history. Let's see how memorial glass fits into the long, strange, beautiful story of how humans have tried to hold on to each other across the boundary that separates the living from the gone. To understand how revolutionary memorial glass actually is, we need to understand the science behind it. Not just the mechanics of melting and cooling, but the chemistry of transformation itself. Because what happens in those crucibles at 1400 degrees Celsius is not simply craft. It is elemental change. It is matter becoming something it was never meant to be, revealing possibilities that ancient glassmakers could never have imagined. Let's start with what cremation ash actually is. When a human body is cremated, it is subjected to temperatures between 760 and 1150 degrees Celsius for approximately 2 to 3 hours. Soft tissue vaporizes. Organic compounds break down into gases that dissipate. What remains are the mineral components of bone, primarily calcium phosphate, which comprises about 60 to 70% of skeletal structure, along with calcium carbonate, potassium, sodium, magnesium, traces of iron, zinc, and other elements that vary person to person based on diet, environment, genetics, medical history. These remains are then processed, ground into the fine, uniform powder we recognize as ash. The average adult yields approximately 2 to 4 kilograms of cremated remains. It looks homogeneous, that gray powder, but it is actually a complex mineral mixture. And it is this complexity that makes memorial glass possible. Traditional glass making requires 3 essential components: silica, which provides the glass-forming structure, a flux-like sodium carbonate that lowers the melting point, and a stabilizer like calcium oxide that prevents the glass from dissolving in water. Human ash already contains calcium in abundance. It already contains traces of sodium, magnesium, and other minerals. It is, in a sense, halfway to being glass already. It just needs silica and heat. Algordanza's process begins with analysis. A small sample of the ash is tested to determine its exact mineral composition. This is critical because every person's remains have a slightly different chemical signature. Someone who lived near the ocean might have higher sodium levels. Someone who took calcium supplements for osteoporosis might have denser mineral content. Someone who worked with metals might have trace elements that create unexpected colors. Based on this analysis, technicians calculate the precise ratio of ash to glass-forming materials. Too much ash, and the mixture won't fuse properly. Too little, and the personal element becomes diluted, symbolically meaningless. The typical ratio is approximately 30 to 40% cremation ash to 60 to 70% added silica and flux compounds, though this varies based on the specific composition of each batch. The mixture is placed in a heat-resistant crucible, often made of graphite or specialized ceramic that can withstand extreme temperatures without degrading. The crucible is loaded into a furnace that can reach and sustain temperatures above 1400 degrees Celsius. At this temperature, everything melts. The solid powders become liquid, fluid, moving like honey or lava. The minerals disperse throughout the molten glass, no longer distinguishable as separate particles, but integrated at a molecular level. This is where the magic happens. Though, of course, it is not magic, it is chemistry. But chemistry so elegant, it feels like something more. As the minerals from the cremation ash interact with the silica matrix, they create color. Not pigment added from outside, but color generated from within the material itself. Copper compounds create blues and greens, the turquoise of oxidized copper, the deep blue-green of ancient patina. Iron creates ambers, browns, sometimes deep reds depending on oxidation state. Manganese can produce purple or violet hues. Chromium yields green. Cobalt, if present in trace amounts from medical procedures, creates intense blue. The exact shade depends on concentration. on how the elements interact, on the cooling rate, on variables so numerous that replication is impossible. Each piece is unique because each person is chemically unique. But color is only part of the story. As the molten glass begins to cool, it is shaped. Some facilities use traditional glass blowing techniques, gathering molten material on the end of a pipe and inflating it, shaping it with tools and breath. Others use molds, pouring the liquid glass into forms that create beads, pendants, spheres, or custom shapes requested by families. Still others create solid pieces that are later cut and polished like gemstones. The cooling must be controlled. Too fast, and the glass develops internal stresses that can cause it to crack or shatter. This is called thermal shock, and it is the enemy of any glassmaker. Instead, the pieces are placed in an annealing oven where the temperature is gradually reduced over hours or even days, allowing the glass to stabilize, to settle into its final form without fracturing. What emerges is extraordinary. A small bead, perhaps the size of a marble, weighing just a few grams, translucent so that light passes through it, but not completely. There is depth, dimension, a sense of something held within. The color is often uneven, with swirls, gradients, patches of lighter and darker tone. Sometimes there are tiny bubbles, trapped air, or gas that couldn't escape during the melting process. Sometimes there are inclusions, small crystals, or opaque areas where minerals concentrated during cooling. These imperfections are not flaws. They are signatures. They are evidence that this glass came from something organic, something real, something that was once alive. Perfect industrial glass is uniform, predictable, manufactured. Memorial glass is irregular, surprising, irreplaceable. And it is durable in ways that ash never could be. Glass is one of the most chemically stable materials humans create. Ancient Roman glass vessels, buried for 2 millennia, emerge from archaeological sites still intact, still transparent. Medieval stained glass windows, exposed to centuries of weather, remain brilliant. Glass does not rust like metal, does not decay like wood, does not crumble like stone. It endures. This means memorial glass could theoretically last thousands of years. Long after photographs fade, after digital files corrupt, after memories blur into legend, the glass remains. A physical link across generations so distant they share no living memory, no common language, no cultural continuity except this: a small colored bead, warm in the hand, catching light the same way it did for someone who held it centuries ago. But Switzerland did not invent this practice in a vacuum. The country's embrace of memorial glass reflects deeper cultural factors that made such innovation not just possible, but welcomed. Switzerland has long been at the forefront of death industry professionalization. The Swiss approach death with the same systematic pragmatism they bring to banking and engineering. High cremation rates, over 90% as of 2025, are driven partly by limited land in a mountainous country, partly by environmental consciousness, partly by cost considerations, and partly by a cultural shift away from traditional religious burial rites toward personalized, secular memorialization. Swiss law allows considerable freedom in how cremated remains are handled. Families can keep ashes at home, scatter them in designated areas, or commission memorial objects like glass. This legal flexibility contrasts sharply with countries like Germany, where strict regulations require remains to be buried in consecrated ground, or France, where scattering laws are highly specific. Switzerland's regulatory openness created space for innovation. Moreover, Switzerland's small-scale artisan culture, the tradition of watchmaking, jewelry crafting, precision manufacturing, provided the technical expertise needed to work with cremation ash at such refined scales. The same skills that create mechanical watches with hundreds of tiny components can be applied to creating memorial glass with controlled color and perfect clarity. It is craft meeting chemistry, meeting cultural readiness. The cost reflects this artisanship. Memorial glass typically ranges from 1,500 to 5,000 Swiss francs, depending on size, complexity, and customization. That is roughly $1,700 to $5,600 USD, or $1,600 to $5,300, significantly more expensive than a basic cremation urn, which might cost $50 to $200, less expensive than a traditional burial plot in Switzerland, which can cost 10,000 francs or more when you include the plot, headstone, and ongoing maintenance fees. For families choosing memorial glass, the cost is often justified by the permanence, the portability, and the intimate nature of the object. An urn sits on a shelf. A bead hangs around your neck. An urn gets left behind when you move. A bead travels with you. An urn is fragile, awkward, a reminder of absence. A bead is durable, beautiful, a reminder of presence transformed. The timeline from cremation to finished glass is typically 4 to 8 weeks. Families provide a portion of the cremated remains, usually 100 to 200 grams, though more can be used for larger pieces or multiple beads. The facility analyzes, processes, melts, shapes, anneals, and polishes. Then the glass is returned, often in a simple wooden box or velvet pouch, accompanied by a certificate of authenticity documenting the process. Some families request multiple pieces. Siblings each want a bead. Children want one for themselves and one to give to their own children someday. Parents who have lost a child sometimes commission enough beads for extended family, for godparents, for close friends, creating a distributed network of remembrance rather than a single centralized memorial. This distribution reflects a modern shift in how we think about remains. Traditional burial creates a fixed point, a place you must return to in order to remember. Memorial glass creates portable presence. It acknowledges that contemporary life is mobile, that families scatter across continents, that we may never return to the town where someone died. The glass travels with us. It adapts to our lives rather than requiring us to adapt to its location. And yet, for all its modernity, memorial glass connects to something ancient. Humans have always sought to preserve, to hold on to make absence tangible. The methods change: glass instead of bone, crucibles instead of crypts, but the impulse remains constant across millennia. We need to carry our dead with us. We need them close. We need proof that they were real, that they mattered, that love does not simply evaporate when the body fails. Switzerland simply found a new language for this ancient need, a language of heat and light, of chemistry and color, of transformation that honors rather than denies the reality of death. The body changes form. It does not disappear. It becomes something else, something that can be held, something that catches the morning sun and throws colored light across the wall. That light is memory made visible. That weight in your palm is love made tangible. That is what Switzerland discovered in those high alpine workshops where ash becomes glass. Not a way to cheat death, but a way to carry it forward, transformed into something beautiful enough to keep close, durable enough to last, personal enough to matter. Memorial glass feels radical, contemporary, almost futuristic. But humans have been doing versions of this for thousands of years. We have always needed physical objects to anchor grief. We have always transformed death into something we can hold, wear, display, pass down. The materials change: bone, hair, metal, now glass. But the impulse is ancient and universal. To understand memorial glass, we need to understand this history. We need to see the long tradition of creative memorialization that makes Swiss innovation feel less like a break from the past and more like its natural continuation. Begin in Victorian England in the 1800s, when mourning became an elaborate public performance with strict rules and remarkable creativity. When someone died, especially someone beloved, their hair was carefully cut and preserved. Not simply kept in a locket, though that was common enough. Victorian hair was woven, braided, sculpted into intricate jewelry that required genuine artistic skill. Mourning brooches featured coiled hair arranged in patterns behind glass, surrounded by black enamel or jet. Rings held tiny braids wound so tightly they resembled rope. Bracelets incorporated strands from multiple family members, creating genealogies you could wear on your wrist. Some pieces were purely decorative. Others spelled names or dates using hair arranged like calligraphy. The most elaborate examples featured entire scenes: willow trees, urns, angels, constructed from human hair with the delicacy of embroidery. This was not considered morbid. It was considered proper, respectable, a way of keeping the dead present in daily life. Hair does not decay. It persists for centuries, millennia even, long after flesh and bone have returned to soil. Egyptian mummies still have hair. Bodies recovered from peat bogs, thousands of years old, emerge with braids intact. Hair is durable, personal, and unlike other body parts, it can be removed without harm, without violence, without desecrating the corpse. Victorian mourning culture also produced memento mori jewelry, pieces explicitly designed to remind the wearer of mortality. Skulls carved from ivory or jet, coffin-shaped lockets, rings engraved with "Death conquers all," or "Remember, you will die." These were not meant to be depressing. They were meant to be clarifying, to put daily troubles in perspective, to remind the living that time is limited and should not be wasted on trivial resentments or postponed joys. But Victorians did not invent memorial objects. They inherited and elaborated on practices that stretched back centuries. Medieval Europeans created reliquaries, ornate containers designed to hold fragments of saints, a finger bone, a tooth, a scrap of clothing. These relics were believed to hold spiritual power, to perform miracles, to connect the faithful with divine intervention. The containers themselves were masterworks of gold, silver, precious stones, crafted with the finest skills available because the contents were considered priceless. Some reliquaries were shaped like the body part they contained: an arm-shaped vessel for an arm bone, a head-shaped bust for a skull fragment. Others were architectural miniatures, tiny churches or temples constructed around a relic too small to see without opening the case. The form mattered as much as the content. Beauty honored the holy. Artistry proved devotion. This practice was not unique to Christianity. Buddhist traditions across Asia preserved the cremated remains of revered monks and teachers in stupas, dome-shaped structures that became pilgrimage sites. The bones themselves were sometimes divided, creating multiple sites of veneration from a single body. In some traditions, these bone fragments were ground and mixed with clay to create small statues or tablets that could be distributed to followers, allowing many people to maintain physical connection with a spiritual teacher. In Tibet, skilled practitioners sometimes requested that after cremation, their ashes be mixed with sacred substances and formed into tsatsas, small molded tablets stamped with prayers or images of deities. These were not hidden away. They were displayed, counted among a family's precious possessions, sometimes placed in personal shrines alongside offerings of incense and water. Japan developed its own distinctive memorial practices. After cremation, family members participate in kotsuage, the bone-picking ceremony, where they use special chopsticks to transfer fragments of bone from the cremation chamber to an urn. This is a communal act, often performed by pairs of people using chopsticks together, passing bones from person to person. It is one of the only times in Japanese culture when two people simultaneously hold something with chopsticks. Normally, a serious breach of etiquette because it resembles the funeral ritual. The significance is intentional. This act happens only once, only for this purpose, only for this person. The bones are not simply dumped into an urn. They are carefully arranged, placed in anatomical order from feet to head, with the throat bone placed last and positioned at the top because it resembles a seated Buddha. The urn then becomes a focal point for ongoing remembrance, kept in the home, visited regularly, addressed in daily prayers. These practices share a common assumption that the body, or what remains of it, retains significance even after death. Not in a superstitious way necessarily, not as if the dead person still inhabits their bones or ashes, but as a marker, an anchor point, a way of saying this person was real. They were here, they mattered, and this object proves it. Even cultures that practice sky burial, the Tibetan practice of leaving bodies on mountaintops to be consumed by vultures, created memorial objects, not from the body itself, which was meant to be completely returned to nature, but from the person's possessions. Prayer, beads the deceased used daily, ritual implements they handled, clothing they wore. These objects absorbed the person's essence through contact, through use, and could continue to carry that presence after death. Indigenous cultures across the Americas developed diverse memorial practices. Some groups created elaborate burial goods, objects made specifically to accompany the dead, pottery, tools, jewelry far too ornate to be practical, intended only for the afterlife. Others practiced secondary burial, where bodies were first buried or placed on scaffolds to decompose. Then later, the cleaned bones were retrieved, painted or decorated, and reinterred or kept by family. The Mapuche people of Chile traditionally kept the skulls of ancestors in the home, treating them as protective presences. The Dayak people of Borneo placed bones in decorated urns called balanga, which were kept in family longhouses or special structures, becoming part of the household, included in family decisions, consulted on important matters. The dead were not gone. They were transformed into elders whose wisdom remained accessible through these physical anchors. Australian Aboriginal cultures developed message sticks and carved bones that encoded family histories, connecting living descendants to ancestors through objects that had to be read, interpreted, passed down with oral instruction. The objects themselves were sacred, but their meaning depended on continued cultural knowledge, on someone alive who could explain what the carvings represented. What all these practices reveal is that humans have never been satisfied with simply forgetting the dead. We have never accepted that death should mean total absence. We have always sought ways to make absence partial, to keep some fragment present, accessible, tangible. The methods vary enormously across cultures and centuries, but the underlying need is universal. Victorian hair jewelry and Swiss memorial glass are not opposites of traditional burial. They are variations on the same theme, expressions of the same fundamental human refusal to let go completely. Hair and glass both offer durability, beauty, portability, intimacy. Both transform something associated with the body into something that can be worn, touched, kept close through years and decades of ongoing life. The shift from burial to cremation to memorial objects reflects changing circumstances. Urbanization, reducing available land. Mobility making fixed graves impractical. Secularization, reducing religious authority over death rituals. Individualization, increasing demand for personalized rather than standardized memorials. But beneath these changes, the continuity is striking. We still need objects. We still need to touch something real. We still need proof that the person existed, that they were loved, that their absence leaves a space in the world. Memorial glass is simply the latest chapter in this ancient story. It uses contemporary technology, precision furnaces, chemical analysis, controlled cooling to achieve an ancient goal, transforming death into something bearable by transforming the dead into something beautiful. Something that does not demand we forget, but also does not trap us in grief. Something that acknowledges change while preserving connection. The Victorians wove hair into art. Medieval Christians encased bone in gold. Tibetan Buddhists molded ash into sacred tablets. The Swiss melt ash into colored glass. The materials evolve. The craft techniques advance. But the human heart remains consistent across centuries, across continents, across every cultural difference. We need our dead with us. We need them transformed, but not erased. We need them made into something we can carry forward as we continue living. This is not morbid. This is not denial. This is adaptation. This is creativity in the face of the one certainty that unites every human who has ever lived. And understanding this history makes memorial glass look less like an oddity and more like what it actually is. One more expression of humanity's endless ingenuity in making meaning from loss, making beauty from endings, making connection persist across the boundary that seems absolute but has never, in any culture, been allowed to be final. Why does touching something help us remember? Why does holding a physical object connected to someone who died ease grief in ways that photographs or memories alone cannot? The answer lies deep in how human brains process loss, form attachments, and construct meaning from material things. Memorial glass works not because of chemistry alone, but because of psychology, neuroscience, the ancient wiring that connects touch to emotion, object to identity, matter to memory. Begin with a fundamental fact. Humans are haptic creatures. We understand the world through touch as much as through sight or sound. Infants explore by grasping, mouthing, manipulating objects. Touch is how we first learn that we are separate from the world, that there is self and other, that objects persist even when we close our eyes. This tactile learning never stops. Throughout life, we reach for things when we need comfort. We hold hands. We embrace. We stroke soft fabric when anxious. We fidget with objects in our pockets. Touch grounds us in physical reality when emotions threaten to become overwhelming. When someone dies, we lose access to their physical presence. We can no longer touch them. hold them, feel the warmth of their hand or the texture of their hair. This loss is not merely symbolic, it is neurological. Our brains have dedicated circuits for processing social touch, for releasing oxytocin when we embrace someone we love, for calming the amygdala's fear response through physical contact. When that person dies, those circuits are suddenly deprived of input. The brain keeps reaching for connection that is no longer available. Memorial objects partially restore that circuit. Not fully, not perfectly, but enough to matter. Holding a glass bead made from someone's ashes activates the same tactile processing regions as holding any object. But because the object is cognitively associated with the deceased, because we know this glass contains their physical remains, the brain treats it differently than a random stone or bead. It becomes a proxy, a stand-in, a way of maintaining physical connection when direct connection is impossible. This is not superstition or magical thinking. It is embodied cognition, the well-documented phenomenon where physical actions influence mental states. Athletes hold lucky objects before competitions because the tactile familiarity reduces anxiety. People keep childhood blankets into adulthood because touching them triggers remembered feelings of safety. Soldiers carry photographs of loved ones, not just to look at, but to hold, to touch repeatedly, to create physical ritual that anchors emotional stability in unstable situations. Memorial glass functions similarly. The weight of the bead in your palm, the coolness of the glass warming slowly to body temperature, the smooth surface that can be rubbed rhythmically during moments of stress, all of this provides sensory input that helps regulate emotion. Grief is destabilizing. It creates feelings of unreality, of disconnection from normal life. A physical object that can be touched, held, warmed, carried, provides an anchor point. This is real. This is here. This connects me to something that was also real, also here. The neuroscience of memory adds another layer. Memories are not stored in neat files like documents on a computer. They are networks of associations distributed across the brain. Visual details in one region, emotional tone in another, sensory information in yet another. The more strongly associated a memory is with multiple types of input, the more readily it can be retrieved and the more vivid it feels when recalled. Objects help create these multi-sensory memory networks. You might remember someone's face when you see their photograph, but if you hold an object they touched, wore, or in the case of memorial glass, literally became, the memory recruits tactile associations as well as visual ones. The brain lights up in more areas. The memory becomes richer, more present, more emotionally resonant. This explains why people often report that memorial objects trigger specific memories. Holding the glass bead, a person might suddenly remember the texture of their mother's hand, the weight of their father's embrace, the particular way a child leaned against them. The physical sensation of the object creates a bridge to physical sensations associated with the person, allowing memories to surface that might not emerge from looking at photographs alone. There is also the phenomenon that psychologists call continuing bonds. For decades, grief counseling was dominated by the idea that healthy grieving required letting go, moving on, achieving closure. The assumption was that maintaining connection to the deceased was denial, a failure to accept reality, an impediment to healing. But research over the past several decades has thoroughly challenged this model. Studies of bereaved parents, widows, widowers, and others who have lost central figures in their lives reveal that most people do not simply let go. They do not achieve closure in the sense of feeling finished with the relationship. Instead, they transform the relationship. They find ways to maintain connection that acknowledge death but do not require total severance. They talk to the deceased in their minds. They make decisions based on what the person would have wanted. They keep objects, visit graves, perform rituals that maintain presence in absence. This is not pathological. It is adaptive. It allows people to integrate loss rather than be destroyed by it. The relationship does not end. It changes form. It becomes internalized, a part of the survivor's ongoing identity rather than an external interaction. And objects play a crucial role in this transformation. A memorial glass bead becomes a focal point for continuing bonds. It can be addressed, held during difficult decisions, touched when the person's guidance feels needed. Some families report talking to the glass, updating the deceased on family news, asking for strength during challenges. This might sound strange to outsiders, but it serves important psychological functions. It allows the survivor to maintain role identity. Still someone's child, still someone's parent, still someone's partner, even though the other half of that relationship has died. The glass also provides what psychologists call a transitional object, a term originally used to describe security blankets and stuffed animals that children use to bridge the gap between total dependence on caregivers and independent self-soothing. Adults use transitional objects too, especially during periods of change or stress. The memorial bead becomes something that can be touched for comfort, something that represents connection while allowing for separation, something that says, "I am alone, but not entirely alone." Material culture scholars add another dimension to this understanding. Objects are never just objects. They are what anthropologists call meaning-laden, carriers of significance that extends far beyond their physical properties. A wedding ring is not just a circle of metal. It symbolizes commitment, history, identity. An heirloom quilt is not just fabric. It carries generations of family story, hands that stitched it, beds it warmed, occasions it marked. Memorial glass operates in the same symbolic register. It is not just pretty colored glass. It is a person transformed, compressed, concentrated into something small enough to hold, but heavy with significance. Every time someone looks at it, touches it, explains it to someone else, they are performing an act of remembrance. They are saying, this person mattered enough that their physical remains were transformed into art. This person is still part of my life, even though they are no longer alive. This matters especially in cultures where death has become increasingly invisible. 200 years ago, most people died at home, surrounded by family, washed and dressed by relatives, mourned in the house before burial. Everyone saw death, touched dead bodies, participated directly in the rituals. Today, death largely happens in hospitals and nursing homes. Bodies are immediately removed to funeral homes. Professionals handle everything. Many people reach adulthood without ever seeing a corpse, without touching a dead person, without direct confrontation with mortality. This distancing has psychological costs. It makes death feel unreal, abstract, something that happens to other people until suddenly it happens to someone we love, and we are unprepared, shocked by the physical reality, unable to integrate what has happened. Memorial objects bridge this gap. They make death tangible in a manageable way. The person is gone, But here is something physical, something real, something that proves they existed and still have material presence in the world. For children especially, memorial objects provide crucial support. Children think concretely. Abstractions like heaven or spiritual presence are difficult to grasp. But a bead they can hold, a color they can see, a weight they can feel, this makes sense. This allows them to maintain connection to a deceased parent, grandparent, or sibling in a way that accommodates their developmental stage. As they grow, the object's meaning can deepen, can become more symbolic and less literal, but the physical anchor remains constant. There is also the dimension of ritual. Humans need rituals around death. We need structured ways to express grief, mark transitions, signal to ourselves and others that something significant has happened. Traditional funerals provide this, but they are time-limited. The funeral ends. Guests leave. Life is supposed to return to normal. But grief does not follow that timeline. It continues for months, years, sometimes a lifetime, and there are limited rituals for ongoing grief. Memorial objects create opportunities for private, personal rituals. Touching the glass bead every morning becomes a way of saying good morning. Wearing it on significant anniversaries becomes a way of including the deceased in important events. Passing it to the next generation becomes a ritual of family continuity. These small acts accumulate meaning over time, creating a personal liturgy of remembrance that does not require religious authority or community participation. And finally, there is the simple fact that objects outlast memory. Human memory is fallible. We forget faces, misremember details, lose access to specifics as decades pass. But objects persist. A memorial glass bead can be held by great-grandchildren who never met the person, can carry stories forward through generations, can serve as a tangible link across time in ways that oral history alone cannot achieve. This is why memorial glass works emotionally. Not because it is glass specifically, but because it is physical, durable, beautiful, personal, and portable. It meets multiple psychological needs simultaneously. The need for tactile connection, the need for continuing bonds, the need for meaning-making, the need for ritual, the need for tangible proof that love and loss were real. It transforms the most abstract and incomprehensible aspect of human existence, death, into something concrete enough to hold in the palm of your hand. Memorial glass may work psychologically, but does it work religiously? Does it work spiritually? Does it respect the sacred status that many traditions assign to human remains? The answer depends entirely on who you ask. Across the world's religious and cultural traditions, responses to memorial glass range from enthusiastic acceptance to cautious ambivalence to absolute prohibition. Understanding these perspectives reveals fundamental differences in how cultures conceptualize the body, the soul, and the proper relationship between the living and the dead. Start with Christianity, which is not a monolith, but a collection of traditions with divergent views. The Catholic Church, which has historically been strict about burial practices, issued updated guidelines in 2016 that explicitly permit cremation, but emphasize that ashes should be kept in a sacred place, preferably a cemetery or church columbarium, rather than divided, scattered, or kept at home. The reasoning is theological. The body is sacred because it was the temple of the Holy Spirit during life, and even after death, it deserves reverence. Dividing ashes or turning them into jewelry could be seen as disrespectful, as treating the body like property rather than sacred remains. However, the Catholic position allows for pastoral flexibility. Individual priests may counsel families differently based on circumstances, grief needs, and the specific meanings families attach to practices like memorial glass. If a family approaches memorial glass with reverence as a way of maintaining respectful connection rather than as commodification, some clergy may find it acceptable. Others will not. The ambiguity leaves room for individual interpretation while maintaining official caution. Protestant traditions vary widely. Many evangelical and fundamentalist churches prefer traditional burial because of beliefs about bodily resurrection. The idea that at the end of time, the dead will be physically raised and reunited with their souls. Cremation, let alone transforming ashes into jewelry, can feel theologically problematic if it is seen as destroying the body that God intends to resurrect. However, mainstream Protestant denominations, Methodists, Presbyterians, Lutherans, Episcopalians, have largely accepted cremation and tend to leave decisions about what to do with ashes to individual conscience. If memorial glass brings comfort and is approached with appropriate seriousness, many Protestant clergy would not object. Eastern Orthodox Christianity traditionally opposes cremation entirely, preferring intact burial of the body whenever possible. The theology emphasizes the body's participation in salvation, the physical nature of resurrection, and the importance of the body decomposing naturally in consecrated ground. Memorial glass would be a non-issue for most Orthodox Christians because they would not choose cremation in the first place. However, Orthodox communities outside traditionally. Orthodox countries sometimes make accommodations when local laws or costs make burial impractical. Judaism presents a similar range. Orthodox and conservative Judaism generally require intact burial, viewing the body as God's property that must be returned to the earth whole. Cremation is associated with pagan practices and with the Holocaust, making it deeply problematic for many Jews. Reform Judaism is more flexible, allowing cremation if that is the individual's or family's preference, but still emphasizing that ashes should be treated with respect, buried rather than scattered or divided. The Jewish concept of kavod hamet, honoring the dead, is central. Any practice must demonstrate honor rather than disrespect. Memorial glass could be seen as honoring if it preserves remains carefully and meaningfully. Or it could be seen as dishonoring if it treats the body as raw material for decoration. Intent and execution matter. A family approaching memorial glass as a sacred act, commissioning it with prayer and reverence, might navigate Jewish principles successfully. A family treating it as a commercial transaction might not. Islam is generally clear and strict. Cremation is forbidden. The body must be buried intact as quickly as possible after death, without embalming or elaborate preparation, wrapped in simple cloth and placed directly in the earth. The theological reasoning emphasizes that the body belongs to God, was created by God, and must be returned to God in its natural form. Burning the body is seen as mutilation, disrespect, violation of divine command. For Muslims, memorial glass is not a question because the preceding step, cremation, is already prohibited. In contexts where cremation happens despite religious prohibition, such as when non-Muslim authorities require it, or when someone has apostatized or converted, the question might arise. But traditional Islamic scholars would almost certainly reject it as compounding an initial violation with further disrespect. Buddhism offers a striking contrast. Most Buddhist traditions embrace cremation and have done so for millennia, since the Buddha himself was cremated and his ashes divided and enshrined. The body is seen as temporary, a vessel for consciousness that has no permanent identity. After death, the consciousness has already departed, moved on to rebirth, or, for enlightened beings, to nirvana. What remains is just material, elements that can be returned to nature in whatever form is culturally appropriate. In this context, memorial glass fits easily within Buddhist principles. The body is already understood as impermanent, a collection of aggregates that will disperse. Transforming ashes into glass is simply one more transformation in an endless chain of transformations. If it helps the living maintain connection, cultivate memory, or generate merit through remembrance, it can be seen as skillful, beneficial, consonant with Buddhist values of compassion and adaptability. Different Buddhist cultures have developed different memorial practices. Tibetan tiesatsas, Japanese bone urns, Thai cremation ceremonies with elaborate temporary structures that burn with the body. And there is no reason memorial glass could not be incorporated as another culturally specific expression of the same underlying acceptance of transformation. Hinduism similarly embraces cremation as the norm, viewing it as necessary to release the soul from the body so it can continue its journey through the cycle of rebirth. The ashes are traditionally immersed in sacred rivers, especially the Ganges, as a way of returning the elements to their divine source. Keeping ashes at home or in memorial objects is less common traditionally, but Hindu practice has always been flexible, adapting to local conditions and family preferences. Some Hindu families might object to memorial glass on the grounds that it prevents proper immersion of ashes in sacred water. Others might see it as acceptable if a portion of ash is immersed, while another portion is transformed into glass. Still others, especially those living far from India or sacred rivers, might embrace memorial glass as a practical way to maintain connection when traditional practices are geographically impossible. Hindu philosophy's emphasis on personal spiritual path rather than rigid orthodoxy leaves room for individual adaptation. Secular and non-religious perspectives introduce yet another dimension. For people without religious commitments, the question is not what God commands or scriptures prescribe, but what feels right, what serves the living, what honors the dead in personally meaningful ways. Memorial glass fits naturally into this framework. It is innovative, personal, environmentally neutral, aesthetically pleasing, and functionally useful for maintaining connection. Without theological constraints, the only questions are practical and emotional. Does this bring comfort? Does it feel respectful? Does it serve the needs of grief? But even secular perspectives are not monolithic. Some people find memorial glass beautiful and moving. Others find it uncomfortable, too intimate, crossing a boundary they cannot articulate but feel strongly. These reactions are cultural as much as individual. In Scandinavia, where cremation rates exceed 80% and death practices are highly individualized, memorial glass is relatively uncontroversial. In Mediterranean cultures, with strong traditions of elaborate funerals, family crypts, and regular grave visitation, memorial glass can feel alien, wrong, a violation of how things are supposed to be done. Cultural context also shapes how memorial glass is discussed. In societies where death is spoken of openly, where death education is integrated into schools and public discourse, Memorial glass is just one more option on a spectrum of choices. In societies where death is taboo, where polite conversation avoids mentioning mortality, memorial glass can provoke strong reactions simply because it makes death visible, tangible, present in ways that traditional practices keep at a comfortable distance. This discomfort is not irrational. There is something provocative about wearing someone's remains as jewelry. It challenges the boundary between living and dead, between person and object, between memory and matter. It asks us to accept that the person we loved is now glass, now a bead we can drop, lose, accidentally damage. For some people, this acceptance is healing. For others, it is intolerable. Indigenous perspectives add further complexity. Many indigenous cultures maintain sophisticated relationships with ancestors, treating them as ongoing presences who guide and protect the living. Objects made from or associated with the deceased can be sacred, powerful, requiring careful handling and specific rituals. In these contexts, something like memorial glass might be embraced if it is approached with appropriate ceremony, if it is integrated into existing ancestor practices, if elders and community approve. But it could also be rejected if it feels too commercial, too divorced from traditional practices, too much like colonial culture imposing new ways onto old understandings. The question would not be whether memorial glass is inherently good or bad, but whether it can be incorporated respectfully, whether it serves community needs, whether it honors ancestors in ways that maintain cultural continuity. What emerges from this global survey is that memorial glass exists at the intersection of multiple tensions: tradition versus innovation, religious authority versus personal choice, communal practices versus individual grief, sacred duty versus practical need, ancient wisdom versus contemporary adaptation. There is no universal answer. There is no single correct response. Some traditions prohibit it clearly. Some embrace it readily. Most exist in the ambiguous middle ground, where official positions may say one thing while individual practitioners do another, where generational differences create conflict, where geographical distance from traditional homelands forces adaptation, where personal grief overrides communal norms. This ambiguity is not a flaw. It is reality. Death has always been contested territory. Every culture develops rules, but every culture also bends those rules when individuals need something different. Memorial glass simply makes these tensions visible. It asks us to decide what we believe about bodies, souls, memory, respect, and whether traditional practices must be preserved unchanged or can evolve to meet changing circumstances. For families considering memorial glass, these religious and cultural questions cannot be ignored. They require honest conversation about values, beliefs, community expectations, family traditions. A practice that brings comfort to one person might cause distress to another. A choice that feels perfectly appropriate in one cultural context might feel deeply wrong in another. The key is intentionality. Memorial glass approached casually as just another consumer option misses the gravity of what it represents. Memorial glass approached with reverence, with awareness of its significance, with consultation among family and community, with respect for diverse perspectives. This has the potential to serve genuine needs while honoring both the dead and the living. Consider the ocean. For thousands of years, burial at sea meant wrapping a body in weighted cloth and consigning it to deep water, a practice reserved for sailors who died far from land or for those with profound connection to the sea. Today, a company called Eternal Reefs has transformed this ancient practice into something entirely new. They mix cremation ashes with concrete to create artificial reef balls, textured spheres ranging from basketball size to several feet in diameter, which are then placed on the ocean floor in designated reef locations. These are not merely disposal sites. They are engineered to promote marine life. The texture and composition encourage coral polyps to attach and grow. Fish use the structures for shelter and breeding. Crustaceans colonize the crevices. Over months and years, the reef ball becomes integrated into the ecosystem, transformed from human remains into living habitat. The person becomes coral, becomes shelter, becomes part of the complex web of ocean life. Families can participate in the process. They can help mix the ashes into the concrete, write messages, or embed mementos in the surface before it hardens. Attend the placement ceremony, where the reef ball is lowered into the water. GPS coordinates are provided so family members can return, can dive or snorkel to visit, can see how the reef has developed, what creatures have made it home. Instead of a grave you visit on land, you visit a living memorial underwater, watching it change and grow with each season. The environmental appeal is significant. Traditional burial uses land, requires ongoing maintenance, introduces embalming chemicals into soil. Traditional cremation releases carbon dioxide and requires substantial energy. Reef burial addresses both concerns: no land use, no emissions, and positive environmental contribution by creating habitat in ocean areas where natural reefs have been damaged by warming, acidification, or human activity. Similar logic drives the growing interest in tree pod burials and human composting. Companies like Capsula Mundi in Italy have designed egg-shaped biodegradable burial pods. The body, in fetal position, is placed inside. The pod is buried. A tree is planted directly above. As the body decomposes, it nourishes the tree. The person becomes maple, oak, pine, cherry, whatever species the family chooses. Instead of a headstone, there is a living tree that grows for decades or centuries, providing shade, oxygen, habitat, beauty. This concept resonates especially with environmentally conscious individuals who see traditional burial as wasteful and want their death to contribute to life. The tree becomes memorial and monument, a living presence that changes with seasons, that birds nest in, that children might climb, that can be visited without the somber atmosphere of cemeteries. It is death reimagined as regeneration rather than ending. Human composting takes this a step further. Legal now in several U.S. states, including Washington, Colorado, and Oregon, the process places the body in a vessel with wood chips, alfalfa, and straw. Over approximately 30 days, microbes break down the body completely, creating nutrient-rich soil, about 1 cubic yard per body. This soil can be used to nourish gardens, forests, conservation land. The person literally becomes earth, becomes growing medium, becomes the substrate from which new life emerges. The process is gentle, efficient, and remarkably clean. No burning, no chemicals, no waste. Just natural decomposition accelerated and contained. Families receive the soil, can spread it where meaningful, can plant gardens that they know are nourished by their loved one's physical form. It is practical, affordable, environmentally beneficial, and philosophically powerful. A direct demonstration that death feeds life, that matter transforms but does not disappear. Then there are the more unconventional options, practices that blur the line between memorial and art, between reverence and play. A British company called Vinyl presses cremation ashes into vinyl records. Families can choose what music to include: favorite songs, recorded messages, original compositions. The ash is mixed into the vinyl compound during manufacture. When the record plays, the needle passes through material that contains the deceased. You are literally hearing them, or hearing music through them, engaging with their physical remains in a medium they perhaps loved during life. This is strange, certainly, perhaps even unsettling. But for music lovers, for audiophiles, for people whose identity was intimately connected to sound and music, it offers a form of memorialization that makes intuitive sense. The person becomes music, becomes something that can be played and shared, that fills space with sound rather than occupying space in the ground. Similarly, some companies now offer to incorporate ashes into fireworks. The cremated remains are loaded into firework shells, along with the explosive charges and colored compounds. At a memorial service or celebration of life, the fireworks are launched. The person becomes light, sound, spectacle, brief, and brilliant against the night sky. For a few seconds, they are everywhere, visible to everyone, transformed into pure display before dissipating into air and settling to earth as invisible dust. This strikes some people as inappropriate, as trivializing death. Others find it perfect, especially for people who lived exuberantly, who loved celebrations, who would prefer their memorial to be joyful noise rather than somber silence. Again, the question is not whether it is objectively right or wrong, but whether it matches the person's values, whether it serves the survivor's needs, whether it creates meaning from loss. Tattoo ink mixed with cremation ash represents yet another boundary-crossing innovation. Small amounts of ash are professionally processed and mixed with tattoo ink. Family members or close friends are then tattooed with this mixture, creating permanent body art that literally incorporates the deceased. The person becomes part of someone else's body, is carried not in a locket or bead, but in skin, visible or hidden depending on placement, permanent until the tattooed person also dies. This is intensely intimate. It challenges Western ideas about bodily boundaries, about the separation between self and other, living and dead. But for people who already use tattoos as memorial, names, dates, portraits of the deceased, incorporating actual ashes simply extends existing practice to its logical conclusion. Instead of representation, there is presence. Instead of symbol, there is substance. These innovations share several characteristics. First, they offer alternatives to the traditional funeral industry, which many people experience as expensive, impersonal, emotionally unsatisfying. Second, they emphasize transformation over preservation, accepting that the body will change rather than trying to maintain its form through embalming and sealed caskets. Third, they create opportunities for participation, for families to be involved in the process rather than being passive consumers of professional services. Fourth, they reflect changing environmental consciousness. Younger generations especially are concerned about death's ecological footprint, about using resources sustainably even in dying. These alternatives often have lower environmental impact than traditional burial or cremation, or in cases like reef balls and tree burials, positive impact that creates rather than consumes. Fifth, they expand the geography of memorial. Traditional graves are fixed points. You must travel to them. They exist in cemeteries, spaces set apart from daily life. These alternatives distribute memorial, the ocean reef, the forest tree, the vinyl record that can be played anywhere, the tattoo that travels with the living person. Memorial becomes mobile, integrated into life rather than separated from it. Sixth, they challenge the commercialization and standardization of death. The funeral industry has long been criticized for exploiting grief, for selling expensive caskets and services to vulnerable families. These alternatives, while not free, often cost less and feel more personal, more aligned with individual values rather than industry defaults. But they also raise questions. What happens to the coral reef memorial if ocean temperatures continue to rise and coral dies? What happens to the tree if it is cut down, damaged by storms, killed by disease? What happens if the person with the ash ink tattoo regrets it, wants it removed, dies themselves, and their body is cremated, essentially cremating the original person twice? These are not trivial concerns. They point to the fundamental instability of all memorial practices. Graves erode, headstones crack, cemeteries get abandoned or built over. Family memory fades within a few generations. Names carved in stone become meaningless to people who never knew the person. All memorial is temporary. All attempts to preserve memory eventually fail. These new practices simply make that impermanence more visible, more immediate. Yet this impermanence can be liberating rather than depressing. If all memorial fades, if all memory eventually dissolves, then perhaps the point is not to achieve permanence, but to create meaning in the present, to honor the dead in ways that serve the living, to acknowledge that death is transformation, and transformation continues beyond the initial moment of dying. Memorial glass, ocean reefs, tree burials, vinyl records, fireworks, tattoos. These are all attempts to make transformation meaningful, to participate in it rather than resist it, to find beauty and connection in the fact that matter changes form, but never disappears. They represent a shift from death as ending to death as metamorphosis, from memorial as preservation to memorial as participation in ongoing cycles of existence. Not everyone will embrace these practices. Not everyone should. Traditional burial and cremation serve important needs, connect to cultural and religious traditions that carry weight and wisdom. But the proliferation of alternatives suggests that many people are ready for something different, are searching for ways to approach death that feel more personal, more creative, more aligned with contemporary values and understanding. The death-positive movement, which has grown significantly in the past decade, encourages exactly this kind of innovation and exploration. It advocates for open conversation about death, for demystifying the dying process, for reclaiming death from medical institutions and funeral industries and bringing it back into family and community control. It encourages people to plan their own deaths, to make choices that reflect their values, to approach mortality with curiosity rather than fear. In this context, memorial glass is not an oddity, but part of a larger cultural shift, a reimagining of death as something humans can shape rather than simply endure, as territory for creativity rather than just tradition, as an opportunity to express identity and values even in the final transformation from living person to enduring matter. Memorial innovations like glass beads and coral reefs exist within a larger economic reality. Death is an industry, a massive global industry worth hundreds of billions of dollars annually. Understanding how memorial glass fits into this economic landscape reveals important truths about how commerce shapes grief, how price influences choice, and how market forces increasingly determine what happens to bodies after death. Start with basic numbers. The global funeral services market was valued at approximately $108 billion in 2023 and continues growing as populations age and death rates increase in developed nations. In the United States alone, the funeral industry generates roughly $20 billion annually. The average traditional funeral costs between $7,000 and $12,000 when you include the casket, embalming, viewing, ceremony, hearse, burial plot, headstone, and ongoing grave maintenance. Premium options can easily exceed $20,000 or $30,000. Cremation is significantly cheaper, typically ranging from $1,000 to $3,000 for direct cremation without ceremony, or $3,000 to $6,000 with memorial services. This cost difference is driving cremation rates upward across developed nations. In the United States, cremation surpassed burial as the most common choice in 2015 and now accounts for over 60% of deaths. In countries like Japan, the United Kingdom, and Switzerland, cremation rates exceed 70 or even 90%. But lower cremation costs do not mean the industry makes less money. Instead, businesses have adapted by offering additional products and services. Urns range from simple containers costing $50 to elaborate artistic pieces costing thousands. Columbarium niches in cemeteries rent or sell for prices comparable to burial plots. Scattering services, memorial jewelry, keepsake urns, and cremation diamonds have created entire new revenue streams. Memorial glass fits directly into this economy. At approximately $1,500 to $5,500 depending on size, complexity, and customization, it occupies a middle-tier price point. More expensive than a basic urn, far less expensive than a burial plot and headstone, roughly comparable to cremation diamonds, which typically cost $2,000 to $20,000 depending on size and color. Switzerland, where memorial glass originated, has a particularly expensive death industry. Traditional burial plots in Swiss cities can cost $10,000 to 20,000 francs, with ongoing maintenance fees and time limits. After 20 or 25 years, the plot may be reclaimed unless fees continue. Cremation costs 1,500 to 3,000 francs. Memorial glass at 1,500 to 5,000 francs represents a mid-range option that avoids both the high cost of burial and the sense that direct cremation is too minimal, too lacking in meaningful ritual. This positioning is deliberate. Memorial glass companies market themselves not as the cheapest option, but as the most meaningful, the most personal, the most innovative. They emphasize craftsmanship, uniqueness, emotional value, permanence. They target people who want something special, but find traditional burial outdated or impractical. People who value creativity and individuality. People who see death as an opportunity for personal expression rather than adherence to convention. The target demographic tends to be educated, middle to upper middle class, environmentally conscious, secular or spiritually flexible, geographically mobile. These are people who have questioned other traditional institutions, marriage, career paths, religious affiliation, and are equally willing to question traditional death practices. They have disposable income, but also values that make simple luxury purchases feel hollow. Memorial glass offers something money can buy, but that does not feel purely commercial. It feels meaningful, artistic, personal. This is sophisticated marketing. The death industry has long been criticized for exploiting grief, for pressuring vulnerable families into expensive purchases they cannot afford, for suggesting that love must be demonstrated through expenditure. Memorial glass companies largely avoid this reputation by positioning themselves as alternatives to the traditional industry, as small-scale artisans rather than corporate funeral conglomerates, as facilitating personal choice rather than enforcing social obligation. Yet they are still businesses. They still profit from death. They still market to people in grief. The gentler approach, the emphasis on meaning over materialism, is itself a marketing strategy, one that appeals to contemporary consumers who distrust overt commercialism, but still want to purchase something that feels significant. The economics become more complex when we consider global markets. Memorial glass originated in wealthy Switzerland and has spread primarily to other wealthy nations: Germany, Austria, the Netherlands, the United Kingdom, the United States, Canada, Australia. These are places where cremation is legal and common, where disposable income allows for premium memorial options, where cultural values emphasize individual choice. In lower-income countries, memorial glass remains largely unknown or inaccessible. In much of Latin America, Africa, and Asia, traditional burial remains dominant, driven by religious requirements, cultural traditions, and the fact that land is less expensive than cremation facilities or specialty memorial services. The global death industry is deeply stratified, with wealthy nations having access to dozens of options, while poorer nations have few choices beyond basic burial, or, where available, basic cremation. This stratification raises ethical questions. Is memorial glass a genuine innovation that serves human needs? Or is it a luxury product that allows wealthy people to distinguish themselves even in death? Does the spread of commercial memorial options democratize death by expanding choice? Or does it commercialize death by turning human remains into raw materials for consumer products? Insurance and pre-planning add another economic dimension. Many people now prepay for funeral services, either through dedicated funeral insurance or through savings designated for end-of-life costs. This planning gives families financial breathing room and ensures that death does not create unexpected economic burden. But it also locks people into specific services, specific companies, specific approaches that may not reflect changing values or innovations that emerge between the time of purchase and time of death. Memorial glass is rarely covered by traditional funeral insurance because it is too new, too specialized. This means families must pay out of pocket, must make the decision in the midst of grief rather than in advance, must navigate an unfamiliar market when they are least capable of careful comparison shopping. Some memorial glass companies address this by offering transparent pricing, detailed explanations of the process, and flexible timelines that allow families to make decisions without pressure. The relationship between cost and emotional satisfaction is not straightforward. Expensive funerals do not necessarily provide more comfort or better grief outcomes. Studies of bereaved families find that emotional satisfaction depends more on whether the service felt meaningful, whether it reflected the deceased's values, whether family participated in planning and execution, than on how much money was spent. Memorial glass potentially scores well on these measures. Families are actively involved, choosing to transform ashes rather than accepting default options, selecting colors or styles, sometimes visiting the workshop where the glass is made. The object created is genuinely unique, carries personal significance, serves ongoing emotional needs, rather than being a one-time ceremonial expense. The cost, while not trivial, buys something permanent and functional rather than temporary flowers or single-use ceremonial items. However, this calculation changes based on financial context. For a family with comfortable income, $3,000 for memorial glass may feel reasonable, meaningful, worth the investment. For a family already struggling with medical bills, lost income, and basic cremation costs, that same $3,000 may be impossible or may require sacrificing other needs. The emotional value of memorial glass becomes accessible only to those with economic means to access it. This is the uncomfortable truth of the death industry at every level. Money shapes how we die, where we die, what happens to our bodies, how we are remembered. Wealthy people die in private hospice rooms with pain management and family present. Poor people die in crowded hospitals or alone at home without adequate care. Wealthy bodies are embalmed, displayed, buried in prime cemetery locations, or transformed into memorial art. Poor bodies are cremated as cheaply as possible, ashes scattered without ceremony, or kept in temporary containers because permanent memorials are unaffordable. Memorial glass does not solve this inequality. It exists within it, serves a particular market segment, remains inaccessible to many. Yet it also represents a shift away from the most exploitative aspects of the traditional funeral industry. It costs less than premium traditional funerals. It does not rely on pressuring families into immediate expensive decisions. It creates something of lasting value rather than one-time ceremonial consumption. The broader trend toward cremation and alternative memorials is driven partly by economics. As land becomes more expensive, as urban density increases, as families become more geographically dispersed, traditional burial becomes less practical and more costly. Cremation and its associated options, memorial glass, biodegradable urns, reef balls, even scattering, offer flexibility and lower costs while still providing meaningful ritual. Governments and regulatory bodies increasingly recognize this shift. Laws are changing to permit human composting, to designate reef burial sites, to allow ashes to be scattered in more locations. These changes reflect both changing public values and economic realities. Cemeteries require land, maintenance, perpetual care funding. Alternatives reduce government and municipal costs, while satisfying citizens' desire for choice. The death industry is also consolidating. Large corporations now own many formerly independent funeral homes, creating economies of scale, but also reducing competition and sometimes increasing prices. In this context, specialized small businesses offering services like memorial glass represent market alternatives, prevent total corporate dominance, maintain diversity of options. But consolidation affects them too. Raw materials for memorial glass, specialized glass compounds, furnaces, skilled labor have supply chains that can be disrupted or monopolized. As demand grows, larger companies may enter the market, potentially improving availability and reducing costs through scale, or potentially standardizing and commercializing what is currently a relatively artisanal practice. The future economics of memorial glass depend on these competing forces. Growing demand as awareness spreads, potential cost reductions through scale and competition, possible cost increases if materials become scarce, or if marketing inflates perceived value beyond actual costs, regulatory changes that might encourage or restrict the practice, cultural shifts that either normalize or marginalize innovative memorial practices. What remains constant is that death will always have economic dimensions. Bodies must be handled, disposed of, memorialized. These processes require labor, materials, space, expertise. Someone must pay these costs. The question is not whether death should be commercial. It already is and always has been. But whether that commerce serves people fairly, respects their grief, offers genuine choice, and avoids exploitation of vulnerability. Memorial glass, at its best, represents commerce that attempts to be ethical, personal, meaningful. At its worst, it is another way to extract money from grieving families. Most likely, it is both simultaneously, a genuine innovation that serves real emotional needs while also being a profit-making enterprise that benefits from the inevitability of death. That contradiction cannot be resolved. It can only be navigated carefully, with awareness, with attention to what is being purchased and why, with honesty about both the emotional value and the economic reality of transforming ash into colored glass. Beneath all the practical questions about memorial glass, the chemistry, the cost, the cultural acceptance, lies a deeper philosophical inquiry. What is the body after death? Is it still a person, or has it become an object? Does it retain sacred status, or is it simply matter? Does DNA in ashes preserve some essential identity, or is identity something that exists only in living consciousness? These questions have no definitive answers, but exploring them reveals why memorial glass provokes such strong reactions and why our choices about what to do with remains matter so profoundly. Start with the most basic question. When does a person stop being a person? The medical answer is clear. Death occurs when the brain ceases activity, when the heart stops permanently, when the body can no longer sustain the integrated functioning that defines biological life. Legal definitions align with medical ones, establishing criteria for declaring death so that organs can be harvested, life support removed, death certificates issued. But phenomenological death, the subjective experience of when someone stops being present, does not follow medical timelines so neatly. Many people report feeling the person's presence immediately after clinical death, sensing them in the room, feeling their consciousness lingering before departing. Others report the opposite, that the person was already gone before death, that dementia or coma had already taken the essential self, leaving only a body that continued breathing. This ambiguity extends to how we treat bodies after death. We do not simply dispose of corpses like medical waste, though biologically they are tissue that will decay and potentially harbor pathogens. We treat them with ritual care, with reverence, with procedures that acknowledge they were recently persons, even though they are persons no longer. We wash them, dress them, speak to them, apologize when handling them roughly, maintain privacy and dignity even though the dead cannot experience violation. This suggests we recognize some lingering status, some transitional period where the body is neither fully person nor fully object, but something in between. Anthropologists call this liminal state, the threshold between categories. The corpse is liminal, no longer alive, but not yet fully transformed into non-person matter. Funeral rituals function to move the body through this liminal state, to transform it socially and symbolically from person to memory, from presence to absence. Different cultures handle this transition differently. Some maintain the fiction of personhood longer, talking to the corpse, including it in family meals, keeping it in the home for days or weeks. Others accelerate the transition, removing the body immediately, delegating handling to professionals, creating spatial and temporal distance between death and disposal. Neither approach is wrong. Both serve the same function of managing the disturbing fact that someone we knew as conscious, active, responsive has become inert matter. Cremation accelerates this transformation radically. The body that might have been recognizable, that retained human shape and features, becomes ash within hours. The personhood is burned away. What remains is minerals, calcium, trace elements, chemistry without biology, matter without life. This ash is even more ambiguous than the corpse. Is it still the person? Does it deserve the same reverence? Can it be divided, scattered, transformed? Legal systems struggle with these questions. In most jurisdictions, cremated remains are classified as property that can be owned, willed, distributed. They are not human remains in the legal sense that would trigger regulations about burial, handling, transportation. They are things, objects, possessions. Yet most people do not treat them as mere property. They are sacred objects, repositories of something essential, deserving special care, even though legally they are no different from any other possession. Memorial glass intensifies this ambiguity. When ash becomes glass, has the person been honored or violated? Has sacred material been transformed into art or degraded into commodity? The answer depends entirely on philosophical assumptions about what the body is and what it represents. One perspective, common in materialist and secular thought, is that the body is simply matter organized temporarily into a living system. When that system fails, the matter remains, but the organization dissolves. The person was the organization, the pattern, the process of being alive. Once that process stops, there is no person anymore, just elements that were briefly arranged in a particular configuration. In this view, what happens to those elements is morally neutral. They can be buried, burned, composted, scattered, or made into glass. None of these choices is more respectful than others, because there is no person remaining to respect. Only the living matter, what brings them comfort, what honors their memory of the person, what serves their grief. Another perspective, common in religious thought, is that the body retains sacred status because it was created by God, housed a soul, participated in spiritual life. Even after death, even after cremation, even as ash, it remains distinct from ordinary matter. It was blessed, consecrated, made holy through its association with the divine spark of life. In this view, the body deserves reverence not because of what it is now, but because of what it was, what it contained, what it represented. Transforming it into jewelry or art might be seen as desecration, as treating sacred material with inappropriate casualness. A third perspective, emerging from ecological and indigenous thought, sees the body as matter that belongs to the earth and should be returned to natural cycles. The body was never truly separate from the environment. It was built from food, water, air, was constantly exchanging matter with the world. Death simply completes this exchange, allowing the elements to flow back into soil, water, atmosphere, living organisms. In this view, the most respectful approach is the one that facilitates natural transformation. Burial without embalming, composting, scattering in meaningful landscapes. Memorial glass might be seen as interrupting this natural cycle, as holding on to matter that should be released. But there is also a fourth perspective that sees transformation itself as sacred, as the fundamental truth of existence. Nothing is permanent. Everything changes form. Life becomes death. becomes soil, becomes plant, becomes animal, becomes life again, in endless cycling. The person was never a fixed thing, but a temporary pattern that emerged, existed briefly, and dissolved back into the flux. In this view, memorial glass is beautiful because it makes transformation visible, participates consciously in the metamorphosis that happens inevitably, whether we acknowledge it or not. The person becomes glass, becomes light, becomes color, continues changing form, as they always were, changing form even when alive. The question of DNA adds another layer. Cremation destroys most DNA, fragmenting it beyond the point where it could be sequenced or used to identify remains. But traces may persist in ash, residual organic molecules that technically contain genetic information. Does this mean the ash is still biologically the person, still carries their unique identity encoded in base pairs? Probably not in any meaningful sense. DNA is a blueprint, not the building. The person was the expression of that DNA in living cells, in proteins folded and functioning, in neurons firing and connecting. The information in DNA only matters when it is being read and executed by living systems. Inert fragments of DNA in ash are like words on a page in a burned library. The information may technically exist, but cannot be accessed or expressed, cannot create the thing it encodes. Yet people intuitively feel that DNA matters. It is what makes the ashes, specifically their mother's ashes, their child's ashes, not generic human ash. The uniqueness, the individual specificity, comes from genetics, even if those genetics are now non-functional. This is why memorial glass made from ashes feels different from glass that merely resembles it. The material origin matters symbolically, even if it does not matter functionally. Ownership of remains raises related questions. Who has the right to decide what happens to a body? In most legal systems, the deceased can specify wishes through wills or advance directives, but these are not always legally binding. Next of kin typically have final authority. But what if family members disagree? What if the deceased wanted cremation, but the spouse wants burial? What if siblings cannot agree whether to keep ashes together or divide them? These disputes reveal that remains are contested territory. Different family members may have different relationships with the deceased, different beliefs about what would honor them, different needs for closure and connection. Memorial glass can either solve or exacerbate these conflicts. If there is enough ash for multiple beads, each family member can have one, distributing the remains without requiring consensus. But if one person wants glass while another wants scattering, the ash cannot be both preserved and released, cannot satisfy competing needs simultaneously. Cross-cultural perspective shows how culturally specific Western anxieties about bodies actually are. Many societies have practiced secondary burial, where bodies are buried temporarily, exhumed after years when only bones remain, and those bones are cleaned, decorated, kept, displayed. The Toraja of Indonesia famously keep mummified relatives in the home for years before final burial, treating them as sick rather than dead, including them in family life. The Malagasy of Madagascar periodically exhume ancestors in Famadihana ceremonies, rewrap the bodies in fresh cloth, dance with them, celebrate them. These practices seem bizarre or morbid to Westerners, raised with the expectation that bodies should be buried once and left undisturbed. But they are pragmatic, emotionally healthy ways of managing the transition from person to ancestor, from presence to memory. They acknowledge that this transformation takes time, that grief is not resolved in a single funeral ceremony, that the relationship with the dead evolves over months and years. Memorial glass, in this light, is simply another way of managing the transformation. The ash is not discarded or sealed away, but transformed again into something beautiful, functional, present. The person continues to change, from body to ash to glass, in a process that could continue further. The glass could eventually be broken down, recycled, returned to silica and mineral. Nothing stops changing. Everything transforms infinitely. This is perhaps the deepest truth memorial glass reveals, that permanence is illusion. We want to preserve, to keep, to stop time, and hold on to what we love. But matter does not cooperate. Bodies decay, memories fade, even stone erodes eventually. Memorial glass seems more permanent than ash, but it too is temporary, vulnerable to breakage, loss, the long erosion of geological time. The glass will outlast us, may outlast our grandchildren, but it will not last forever. Accepting this impermanence is difficult, but necessary. Death is transformation. Transformation is endless. We can participate consciously, can shape how it happens for a little while, can make it beautiful and meaningful. But we cannot stop it. The person we loved is changing, will keep changing, is already not what they were. The glass bead is not them. It is what they became, briefly, before becoming something else, forever. Philosophy and theory matter, but grief is lived in daily reality, in specific moments, by specific people navigating the overwhelming fact of loss. To understand what memorial glass actually means, we need to hear from people who have chosen it, families who live with these objects, grief therapists who counsel the bereaved, children who touch the beads and ask questions. The personal stories reveal what statistics and analysis cannot, how memorial innovations work or fail in the intimate, messy, heartbreaking work of surviving someone's death. Sarah was 42 when her mother died of ovarian cancer. The death was not sudden. There had been 2 years of treatment, decline, hospice, goodbye. Sarah thought she was prepared. She was not. After cremation, she kept the urn on a shelf in the guest room, unable to look at it without crying, unable to scatter the ashes because scattering felt like erasing, like letting go before she was ready. A friend mentioned memorial glass. Sarah researched, found a company in Germany, sent a portion of the ashes. 6 weeks later, she received a pendant, deep blue with threads of silver gray running through it. She wears it every day. She told her grief counselor that touching the glass helps when panic rises, when the absence becomes unbearable. The weight reminds her that her mother was real. The color reminds her of the ocean where they scattered her father's ashes years before. The coolness of the glass warming slowly against her skin creates a rhythm, a sensory anchor that brings her back to her body when grief threatens to dissolve her into formless emotion. But Sarah also struggles with questions. Is she keeping her mother too close? Should she have scattered all the ashes, completed the ritual release? Does wearing her mother's remains make it harder to move forward? Her therapist suggests that there is no should, that grief has no timeline, that the glass serves a function now, and if that changes later, she can put it in a drawer, can pass it to her daughter, can make new decisions as her needs evolve. Michael and David lost their daughter Elena to leukemia when she was 7. The death destroyed them differently. Michael became consumed with preserving her memory, her room unchanged, her toys untouched, photographs everywhere. David needed to move forward. Painful reminders felt unbearable. Talking about her felt impossible. They nearly divorced in the year after her death. Their therapist suggested memorial glass as compromise. They could cremate Elena, David's preference, avoiding the ongoing obligation of grave visits. But they could transform some of the ashes into beads. Michael's need to keep her close, tangible, present. They commissioned 5 beads, one for each of them, one for Elena's older brother, one for each grandmother. The glass came back pale pink with unexpected flecks of gold. Michael wears his on a chain visible under his shirt. David keeps his in his desk drawer at work, takes it out during difficult days, holds it briefly before meetings where he needs her strength. Elena's brother, now 15, keeps his bead in a small wooden box with her baby bracelet and a note she wrote him. The beads did not fix their marriage, but they created a middle ground. Michael could honor Elena's memory without demanding that David participate in the same expressions of grief. David could acknowledge her loss without being overwhelmed by constant visual reminders. The beads allowed differentiated grieving within the same family, respecting that people need different things. But there were complications. One grandmother, devoutly Catholic, refused her bead. She saw it as disrespectful, as treating Elena's body like craft material. She wanted the ashes buried in consecrated ground, wanted a place to pray, wanted traditional ritual. Her rejection hurt Michael deeply. It felt like she was rejecting Elena, though she insisted the opposite. She loved Elena so much that she could not participate in what felt like desecration. This fracture took years to heal. Eventually, they compromised. A portion of ashes was buried in the Catholic cemetery with a small headstone. The grandmother visits regularly. Michael and David keep their beads. Elena exists in multiple forms, multiple places, honored through multiple practices that satisfy different needs and beliefs. Yuki, in Japan, commissioned memorial glass for her husband after he died by suicide. The death was sudden, shocking, incomprehensible. She was angry at him for leaving, devastated by loss, guilty about the anger, confused about how to explain it to their children. The traditional funeral felt performative, a ritual she moved through numbly. When she learned about memorial glass, not common in Japan, but available through specialized artisans, she saw possibility. The glass came back dark purple, almost black, with occasional deep red striations. She found it unexpectedly comforting. The darkness matched her grief. The red threads matched her anger. The glass was not pretty in a conventional sense, but it was honest. It did not sanitize or sentimentalize. It acknowledged that grief is complicated, that love and anger coexist, that beauty can be dark. She does not wear the glass. It sits on a shelf in her bedroom where she can see it when she wakes, when she goes to sleep. She talks to it sometimes, tells her husband about the children, about work stress, about her loneliness. She knows he cannot hear. She does not believe in ghosts or an afterlife. But talking to the glass helps her think, helps her process, helps her feel less completely alone. Her children, 9 and 12 when their father died, have different relationships with the glass. Her daughter finds it creepy, does not like to touch it, avoids looking at it. Her son is fascinated, asks to hold it, wants to know exactly how the ash became glass, talks about chemistry and minerals and transformation. Yuki worried initially that this was unhealthy, that he was avoiding emotional processing by focusing on mechanics. But his therapist explains that children process grief cognitively as well as emotionally, that understanding the physical process helps him accept the reality of death, that his fascination is not avoidance but engagement. In contrast, Ravi in India chose memorial glass for his grandmother and now regrets it. His family is Hindu, traditionally practices cremation with ash immersion in sacred rivers. But Ravi lives in London, could not travel to India for the immersion ceremony, felt disconnected from traditional practices. Memorial glass seemed like a way to participate, to have something physical when he could not be physically present for rituals. But when he received the glass, soft orange with brown swirls, he felt only wrongness. This was not his grandmother. This was not Hindu practice. This was Western commercialism imposed on his grief. He showed the bead to his mother via video call. She cried, asked him to send it back to India, to bring it to the Ganges himself when he could visit, to complete the ritual properly. The glass felt like a mistake, a violation, a failure to honor his grandmother in the way she deserved and his culture demanded. He keeps the bead in a drawer, unopened in its original box, waiting for a trip to India that keeps getting postponed. He wishes he had simply waited, had trusted that the ritual could happen eventually, even if not immediately, had not tried to create a substitute for traditions developed over millennia. The glass reminds him of his disconnection from his heritage, from his family, from his roots. It is a memorial to cultural loss as much as to his grandmother's death. These stories are not unusual. Grief therapists report that memorial objects work beautifully for some clients and create additional distress for others. The difference often comes down to congruence, whether the object matches the person's values, beliefs, needs, and relationship with the deceased. A memorial glass bead can be profound for someone who values innovation, personal expression, and tactile connection. It can be disturbing for someone who values tradition, religious orthodoxy, and communal ritual. Therapists also note that relationships with memorial objects change over time. What feels comforting in the first months of grief might feel oppressive years later. What seems wrong initially might grow meaningful as perspective shifts. The glass bead that Sarah wears daily now might spend years in a drawer later. The bead that Ravi rejects now might become precious when his children ask about their great-grandmother. Children present particular challenges and opportunities. Young children are concrete thinkers. Explaining that grandma is now a bead can be confusing, potentially frightening. Is grandma trapped? Is she cold? Can she see? Does it hurt? Therapists emphasize the importance of clear, honest language. The bead is made from what was left after grandma's body stopped working, after she died, after cremation. It is not grandma. It is something made from her body to help us remember her. She is not inside it. She is not anywhere. She is gone. The bead is just a special object that helps us feel connected to memories of her. Teenagers often respond differently. They may find memorial glass meaningful, may want to participate in choosing design, or may create their own memorial objects. Or they may find the whole thing embarrassing, morbid, weird in ways they cannot articulate but feel intensely. Forcing participation rarely helps. Offering it as an option, explaining without pressuring, allowing them to change their minds later. This respects their developmental need for autonomy while keeping the possibility open. Elderly people commissioning memorial glass for themselves, pre-planning their own memorialization, often report feeling empowered by the process. Instead of leaving decisions to grieving family, they choose what feels right, what matches their values, what expresses their identity. Some specify that they want glass made and distributed to specific people. Some plan the opposite, cremation and scattering with no memorial object, because they do not want to be a burden, do not want objects that might guilt-trip the living into keeping things they do not need. These pre-planned choices are gifts to survivors, removing decision-making burden during acute grief, but they also create obligation. If Dad specified memorial glass, can children choose something else if memorial glass does not work for them? Most ethicists and therapists say yes. The wishes of the dead matter, but are not absolutely binding. The living must navigate their own grief, and sometimes that requires deviating from stated wishes. What matters is that the decision is made thoughtfully, with respect for what the person wanted and honest assessment of what survivors need. The stories also reveal an unexpected dimension: memorial glass as catalyst for conversation. Multiple people report that the glass starts discussions about death, grief, bodies, meaning. Someone notices the unusual pendant, asks about it. The conversation that follows can be healing, an opportunity to talk about the person, to explain the choice, to educate others about alternatives to traditional practices. But these conversations can also be intrusive. Not everyone wants to explain their grief to casual acquaintances. Not everyone wants the follow-up questions. Did it cost a lot? Don't you think that's weird? What would your mom think? Some people stop wearing visible memorial glass because the conversations become exhausting, because grief is private and should not require public justification. What emerges from these personal stories is that memorial glass is neither universally good nor universally bad. It is a tool that serves some people beautifully and others poorly. Like all grief interventions, it must be chosen freely, must match values and needs, must allow for change as grief evolves. The glass itself has no inherent meaning. The meaning comes from what people bring to it, what they need it to do, how it fits into their unique constellation of loss, love, belief, and survival. We have traveled through chemistry and culture, economics and emotion, philosophy and personal stories. We have seen how human ashes become colored glass in Swiss workshops, how this practice connects to ancient memorial traditions, how it provokes different responses across religions and cultures, how it serves psychological needs while operating within commercial markets, how it raises profound questions about bodies and identity, and how real people navigate these choices in the chaos of grief. Now we arrive at the end, which is also a beginning, because the question is not just what memorial glass is, but what it means for the future. How will we remember our dead as the world continues changing? What happens to memorial practices as technology advances, as populations shift, as climate changes, as traditional authorities lose influence and individual choice becomes paramount? The trend is clear. Death is being reimagined. The 20th century model, hospital death, professional handling, standardized funeral, permanent grave or urn, is giving way to something more varied, more personal, more experimental. Memorial glass is part of this shift, but so are composting, reef burials, tree pods, bio-urns, space burials, even emerging possibilities like preserving consciousness digitally or encoding memories in DNA. These innovations reflect changing values. Environmental consciousness drives interest in green burial and composting. Geographic mobility drives preference for portable memorials over fixed graves. Secularization drives demand for meaningful ritual that does not require religious belief. Individualism drives rejection of one-size-fits-all approaches in favor of personalized expression. Technology enables options that would have been impossible even decades ago. But the fundamental human needs remain unchanged. We need to mark death, to honor the person, to process grief, to maintain connection across the boundary of mortality. The methods evolve, but the imperative persists. Every culture in human history has developed death rituals. Every society has created ways to memorialize, to transform absence into presence, to make loss bearable through meaning-making. Memorial glass is one answer among many. It will not replace traditional practices. It will not become universal. But it offers something valuable, a way to hold on to someone physically without requiring fixed location, a way to participate in transformation rather than resist it, a way to create beauty from loss, durability from fragility, light from darkness. The glass bead catching sunlight on a windowsill is more than decoration. It is philosophy made tangible. It is the acknowledgement that everything changes, that bodies are temporary arrangements of elements that will rearrange infinitely, that the person we loved is not gone, but transformed, is now ocean and soil and air, and also, briefly, glass. It is the recognition that we can participate in this transformation, can shape it for a little while, can make it meaningful even though we cannot stop it. This is not denial of death. It is acceptance of death as metamorphosis. The caterpillar does not survive becoming a butterfly, but the matter persists, rearranged into something new. The person does not survive death, but the elements persist, become ash, become glass, become eventually something else as the glass itself breaks down over centuries or millennia and returns to silica and minerals and earth. We are all matter in motion, patterns that form temporarily and dissolve back into the chaos from which we emerged. This is not depressing. This is the nature of existence. We are waves on an ocean, distinct for a moment, then merging back into water that will form new waves endlessly. The wave is not the water, but it is made of water, and when it crashes on shore, the water remains. Nothing is lost. Everything transforms. Memorial glass makes this truth visible. It shows that matter can be shaped, that ash can become beauty, that what seems like an ending is actually a transformation. It gives us something to hold when we need to feel that the person was real, that love persists even when its object has changed form beyond recognition. But it also requires acceptance. The glass is not the person. It is not even really a connection to the person, not in any literal sense. It is a tool for our minds, a focus for our grief, a symbol that helps us navigate the incomprehensible fact of mortality. The meaning we find in it is meaning we create, not meaning inherent in colored glass made from calcium and silicon and trace minerals that once held together bones. This is true of all memorial practices. The grave is not the person. The urn is not the person. The photograph is not the person. The memory is not the person. Everything we use to hold on to the dead is substitute, symbol, tool for the living. The dead are gone. What remains is our need to remember, to honor, to continue relationship with absence. Memorial glass serves this need clearly and honestly. It does not pretend the person still exists. It does not promise reunion or resurrection. It simply takes what remains after cremation and transforms it into something beautiful that can be kept close. Whether this is enough, whether it feels right, whether it honors the dead and serves the living, these questions have no universal answers. For some people, memorial glass will be perfect. For others, it will be wrong. For still others, it will be irrelevant. One more option in an overwhelming array of choices they must make while drowning in grief. The proliferation of memorial options is both liberation and burden. Freedom to choose, but also obligation to choose, to research, to compare, to decide when decision-making feels impossible. Perhaps the future of death includes counselors who help navigate these choices, death doulas who guide not just dying, but post-death planning, professionals who understand grief and culture and can help families find approaches that match their values. Perhaps communities will develop new collective rituals that integrate individual preferences within shared frameworks. Perhaps technology will continue generating innovations we cannot yet imagine. Or perhaps the pendulum will swing back toward simplicity, toward rejection of consumerist death, toward natural burial and minimal memorial, toward accepting that memory is enough without requiring objects, rituals, elaborate preservation. Perhaps future generations will see our memorial glass and reef balls and tattooed ashes as excessive, as evidence that we did not know how to let go, did not understand that death is supposed to be release rather than continued holding. We cannot know. We can only navigate death in our own time, with our own tools, making meaning as best we can from the raw material of loss. Memorial glass is one tool, a new tool, barely 20 years old, still spreading, still being tested by families in grief, still generating debate about respect and appropriateness and meaning. In another 20 years, it may be commonplace, unremarkable, one standard option among many. Or it may remain niche, serving a specific demographic with specific values. Or it may fade away, replaced by innovations we have not yet conceived, memorial practices that will seem as strange and provocative to us as memorial glass seems to traditional funeral directors today. What will not change is the human condition. We will continue dying. We will continue grieving. We will continue needing ways to mark loss, to honor memory, to transform the unbearable into something bearable. We will continue seeking connection across the boundary that separates living from dead, presence from absence, matter organized as person from matter dispersed into environment. Memorial glass, in the end, is just one more expression of our refusal to simply forget, our insistence that love persists even when its object has dissolved, our creativity in the face of the one certainty that unites every human who has ever lived. We die, we grieve, we remember. We transform absence into presence through whatever means we can create. Grave markers or glass beads, photographs or stories, rituals or silence, acceptance or defiance. The Swiss workshops where ash becomes glass are sacred spaces not because of what happens there chemically, but because of what happens there symbolically. They are places where humans take the most difficult fact of existence and make it bearable by making it beautiful. They are places where matter that was recently a person becomes matter that can be held, carried, kept close through years and decades of continued living. That transformation from person to ash to glass is the entire human story in miniature. We are temporary, we are fragile, we are mortal, but we are also creative, meaning-making, capable of finding beauty in loss, light in darkness, connection in transformation. We can take what death gives us, ashes, absence, the irreversible fact of ending, and make from it something we can hold on to, something that helps us survive, something that proves love and memory are stronger than death, even if they cannot reverse it. This is not victory over death. Death cannot be defeated. It can only be integrated, accepted, transformed from enemy into teacher, from ending into passage, from loss into metamorphosis. Memorial glass does not change the fact of death. It changes how we carry it forward, how we hold it, how we make peace with the reality that everyone we love will eventually become ash, silence, memory. And then, if we are lucky, eventually nothing at all, as even memory fades, and the final death, being forgotten, completes the transformation that began when the heart stopped beating. But that final forgetting is generations away. For now, for the people who choose memorial glass, there is a bead that catches light, a weight in the palm, a cool surface that warms slowly, a color that emerged from minerals in bones that walked and held and lived. For now, there is transformation made visible, death made beautiful, absence made tangible enough to hold through the long work of learning to live without someone who made life worth living. That is enough. That is everything. That is what memorial glass offers to those who need it, what all memorial practices offer across all cultures and times. A way to carry our dead forward, transformed but not erased, absent but not forgotten, gone but somehow, impossibly, still here in colored glass that catches morning sun and throws light across the walls of rooms where we continue living, continue remembering, continue transforming loss into love, into memory, into light.